Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll just wait a few moments while our attendees join us, but we're so happy to have you all here with us this evening. All right. Okay, well, we'll get started as some more people join us here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're so excited to have you here. Before we begin, Connor from BookBar in Denver would like to share a few words with you all.
Thank you so much, Emily. As you said, my name is Connor Horak, and I'm the assistant book manager at BookBar. We're an independent bookstore in Denver, Colorado. And we're just so honored to be part of this event with Arapahoe Libraries. We have signed book plates for Alice Hoffman and signed books for The Hour of the Witch by Chris Bajalian. When ordering your books from us, just type in the word book plate into the shopping cart comment box to receive any book plates signed by Alice Hoffman for curbside pickup or direct to home orders. And you can type in the word signed copy for a signed copy of The Hour of the Witch. But please also note that the signed copies are only available for curbside pickup only. And if you have any questions, just let us know. But with that, I'll turn it back to Emily.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Connor. And just so everyone knows, Ashley did put in the chat links to purchase the books from BookBar, so go ahead and check that out. So without further ado, we are beyond excited to have award-winning authors Chris Bohjalian and Alice Hoffman with us this evening. We will start tonight's program with a conversation between the two authors, and we'll take some questions from the audience in the final 15 minutes. As you think of questions, please go ahead and enter them into the Q&A tab that you should find in your Zoom toolbar. We'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can. So now I'm thrilled to introduce our very talented guests. Chris Bajalian is a best-selling novelist of more than 20 books, most of which have been New York Times bestsellers. His latest novel, The Hour of the Witch, is a work of historical fiction about a young Puritan woman and the first divorce in North America. Alice Hoffman is the best-selling author of The Dove Keepers, The Marriage of Opposites, Faithful, Practical Magic, and many other titles. She is lauded as the American heir to the Brothers Grimm. In her latest novel, Magic Lessons, she recounts the story of Maria Owens, tracing back the roots of the family first introduced to us in the smash bestseller Practical Magic. So please, it is my greatest pleasure to welcome Chris Bajalian and Alice Hoffman. We're so excited to hear all about your writing and all of your stories. So I'll get the ball rolling really quick with a question of my own, if that's okay. Both of your stories, which are wonderful, by the way, are rich with historical details. Can each of you talk a little bit about the process behind your research? And additionally, I'd love to hear what you learned that surprised you the most.
Alice, would you like to go first? I will always defer to the brilliant Alice Hoffman.
Oh, Chris, thank you. Well, Emily, thanks for introducing us. I'm so happy to be here with Chris. I'm a longtime fan of his work, and it's a pleasure, Chris, to be with you. Congratulations on everything that's happening for you. The Hour of the Witch is doing amazingly. It's like I could not stop reading it. And I could not stop watching The Flight Attendant on television. It's just congratulations. I'm really happy for you that all of this is happening. And I think it's so interesting that you're writing about witches, which is a subject that I've been interested in since first grade. But when I read this book, it really, in many ways, reminded me of the first book that I ever read of yours, Midwives, because of the whole trial situation and also this idea of a woman treated as if she was a criminal, as if she's a witch. And I feel like, this is in a way a theme that you write about. And for me, your female characters are very interesting and very, I don't know how to say this without offending other men, but you have a way of writing about women that's very unusual, I think, for a male writer to be able to write about women characters with the depth and sensitivity that you do. So I just wondered, how long you've been interested in witchcraft and when you started researching this book.
Sure. It wasn't witchcraft that first led me back to the 17th century. It was Puritan theology. I've been obsessed with Puritan theology since college. Imagine living in a world where Satan is as real as your neighbor. Imagine living in a world where you're constantly wondering, am I saved or am I damned? Now, usually when we think of the Puritans and witchcraft, we go right to 1692 and Salem. And for 100 reasons, I too might have gone there. But I came across an obscure 3-line reference in 1672 from Boston's Court of Assistants about Elizabeth Nanny Naylor successfully suing her husband for divorce for cruelty. And 2 things struck me. First of all, imagine being a woman courageous enough to stand before the patriarchal, all-male Boston Court of Assistants, 14 men in black robes, and say, my husband's a beast. That utterly fascinated me. Second, the Puritans surprised me because they did allow divorce. 31 couples divorced in the 17th century. And there were 5 reasons why. 29 of the 31 divorces were for polygamy, desertion, or adultery. 1, and this was a shocker when we think of the Puritans, was for impotence. But 1, Elizabeth Nanny Naylor's, was for cruelty. So that was what led me down the rabbit hole to witchcraft. When I came across a second reference that, well, the Puritans had the world's most atrocious table manners. First of all, they drank beer like it's spring break in Miami. Secondly, they did have plates, but for formal occasions. Usually they were eating out of trenchers, or basically pigs' troughs for humans. And third, they didn't use forks. The fork looked too much like the devil's pitchfork. It was the devil's tines. So you've got a whole bunch of really seemingly devout worthies and saints who are drunk on beer, sharing trenchers, and eating with their hands, not using forks. And the nexus of bad manners and divorce led me to the fork and witchcraft.
Well,
how about you? Obviously, Magic Lessons is a prequel to 2 books that I just adored. And it's, we go back to the 17th century. And before we talk about, you're going back to the Owen sisters in the 17th century. Can I tell 3 Alice Hoffman stories I just love? Number one.
I'm scared.
There's a lot of reasons why writers as well as readers revere Alice. In 1997, yes, I published that book, Midwives. It was my 4th book. The previous 3 had sold combined about 60,000 copies. And that's because my family bought 59,000.
Yeah.
But Alice Hoffman, bless her heart, blurbed it. And that was one of the reasons, even before Oprah swooped into my life, that it became a bestseller. Number 2, Alice Hoffman makes the world a better place, not simply as one of the 20th and 21st centuries brilliant novelists and storytellers, but because of her work for Mount Auburn Hospital and the way that for years she would round up writers from across the country for a night of her favorite authors for one purpose: to raise money for the Mount Auburn Hospital Breast Center. And twice I had the privilege of being there.
I know.
And,
Thank
and
you.
it was just so life affirming. And here's one last Alice Hoffman story. I wasn't sure which of these two Alice Hoffman books it was, but one of these two I happened to review for, I think it was Book Page magazine. And this is like 2004. And it's, like magazines like Cosmopolitan of, headlines on the cover: how to drive your lover wild in bed. Well, this is a book magazine, so the headlines are different. But one of the headlines is Chris Bojalian loves Alice Hoffman.
Oh, Chris.
So my
thanks.
daughter, who at the time is 8 years old, sees this magazine on the dining room table over breakfast and blows a gasket. No, he doesn't. He loves mommy. So my
Sorry,
lovely bride
Chris.
Victoria and I had to explain that this is magazine hyperbole. He loves Alice as a friend and he loves Alice's work. But don't worry, the marriage is solid.
I'm sure it is. And thank you for saying all those things. And thank you for coming and speaking at the event for Pink Pages at the Breast Center at Mount Auburn Hospital. I have to say, I rarely give quotes because I have so many writer friends, and I feel like if I give to one, then what if I don't want to give it to the other? When I read your book, it was one of these, when I read Midwives, I just kind of found the book, and it's one of the experiences that as a reader, I loved, as a younger reader, discovering a book all on your own and just falling in love with it. And that's what happened to me with Midwives. And I thought Oprah was so smart to choose it, I have to say. And, we've known each other for a long time, and I'm just very happy for everything that's happening to you. And, for me, I think we're writing about similar things. And I think that's what interested me in talking to you about this tonight, was that we're both writing about the 17th century Massachusetts. We're both New England writers. So we're kind of drenched in that New England history of all the writers who came before us and all the history that came before us. And I think to be a writer living in New England is very special. And I feel like we're very lucky to have all of this tradition. For me, I became interested in witches. I realized I was, during COVID, I've been cleaning up my house. And so I've been going through all of these files, and I found there's nothing else to do. And I found a drawing that I had done in first grade, which was a black cat and a bat and a witch. And I thought, this is my original work. This was the first time this is my theme. And I always have felt that women relate to witches because they are the only powerful mythic figure, female figure. And that they also are figures of rebellion. And even though, pardon me for saying this, kind of the patriarchy has co-opted the idea of the witch as something kind of ugly and, like living in a hut with, black cats. And that was one of the things that I really loved about your character, is that she's beautiful, she's smart, she's not what people would think of as a witch. And yet everything that's positive about her is used against her.
Oh, if you want to be hanged as a witch in America, be smart, strong, opinionated, courageous.
Yeah. Well, yes. And so for me, I've been writing this series and I've been going back in time, and I landed in the 17th century, and I was just shocked. I mean, I really didn't know anything about the Puritans. Unlike you, I think you came to it knowing quite a bit. I knew nothing. When I read about the way they treated women, that you could be, arrested for wearing silk or for wearing a color or for being too attractive.
Yes.
It was so interesting that the people who were accused later on, I mean, your book takes place before the mania in Salem. It's kind of a precursor to the whole craziness that happened in Salem. But, if you're young, if you're beautiful, if you're old, if you have money, if you're poor, it's really kind of covers all bases.
Yep, yep. I mean, and isn't it fascinating? And it's all theological. It's religious. 30 years before Salem, Hartford was hanging witches. In 1656, the governor of Massachusetts had his own sister-in-law hanged as a witch. And you know, you're spot on about midwives. I mean, Anne Hutchinson appears in Midwives, and Anne Hutchinson appears in Hour of the Witch. Why? Well, because she was a midwife. Unlike the male doctors, she
Right.
wasn't burning toads and putting them up your nose to heal you. She wasn't bleeding you. She was catching babies and using herbs for healing.
Yeah.
So, what did the men do? Well, they didn't hang her, but you know, they did the next worst thing. They sent her into exile. They excommunicated her.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, and it's interesting also in the time of COVID that one of the reasons, I'm sure you found this in your research, is that female witches or healers or whatever they were called were more successful than, you know, their male counterparts, their physicians, was because they washed their hands.
Yep, yep. And they actually looked at the stuff that grew in the natural world. So many of the Puritan men looked into the woods outside of Boston. And what's so fascinating about the 17th century Boston is that, on the one hand, you've got this thriving, growing metropolis where people can't wait for the ships to dock with Madeira and spices and bedsteads. But then you've got the forests. And the men are terrified because A, they're the indigenous people,
Right.
and B, they're Satan. But it was the midwives and the women who went into the woods and found the herbs
Yeah.
and grew the simples.
Well, Chris, can I ask you, you know, you very often have very strong female characters, and I'm wondering,
As do you,
I do too.
clearly.
But I'm wondering, do you think it's because of the reading that you did, or that the women that you've known in your life, or what do you think draws you to write about strong women the way that you do?
I don't know if I've ever told anyone this. When my father was dying in 2010 and 2011, he lived in Florida. I live in Vermont, but every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks, I was flying there. And on one of those visits, my aunt, his sister, said to me, giving me a big hug, she said, "God, Chris, thank God you're the daughter my brother never had." And there's some truth to that. I've always had really smart women in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, my lovely bride, Victoria Bluer, has read every word I've written since we were 18.
Wow.
Our daughter, Grace Experience, has read every word I've written since she was in 8th grade. And I mean, people talk about publishing in transition, but I've been so blessed. I've had the same editor at Doubleday since 2010, Jenny Jackson.
Wow.
And before that, I had Shea Earhart. So I've always had
Shay.
editors who are smarter than me. I mean, the fact that Jenny Jackson is smarter than me is an unbelievable gift because it makes my book so much better.
Well, you know, Chris, it's also interesting that, you know, right now, I was wondering how you felt about writing this book at this time in American history, because I realized when I was writing my 17th century book, Magic Lessons, that
I read Magic Lessons and I kept thinking of the Brett Kavanaugh hearings at different points.
I was really shocked about writing the book and then seeing history around me, which kind of echoed the 17th century and what had happened, you know, in Salem, and what happened to women, you know, throughout the world at that time, also in England. So I just wondered how you were feeling about kind of like the way it reflects politically what's happening, and how women have kind of risen up with the Me Too movement and are now kind of, you know, part of what happens in your book and also in my book is that people keep secrets. women aren't believed, and so that they don't speak up because they're not going to be believed. And that's kind of what we've been seeing here and in our countries, that women are suddenly speaking up.
Magic Lessons and Hour of the Witch might be set in the 17th century, but they are both so freaking timely. In Hour of the Witch, when Mary Deerfield, 24 years old, is standing before the Court of Assistants, and one of the male judges calls her a nasty woman, it won't be lost
I'm familiar.
on contemporary readers.
Yeah.
They will get what's going on. I mean, I could have called this book hashtag I believe her.
Yeah, yeah. That would have been a great hashtag. And it's funny because I feel very strongly that I'm always writing stories for women who weren't allowed to tell their own story. And I think there's something that feels great about being able to do that for women in history who were not able to tell their own story. I always think about when I was in high school, we did not read any women writers. I think Willa Cather was basically it. We did not, there were no female authors in.
I had Kate Chopin too.
Kate Chopin. Yeah, she wasn't on, I read her, but she wasn't on my reading list. I really didn't, I wasn't aware that women wrote. And I just feel like that women have been silenced for so long. So I think, that's one of the things that your book does, is that it gives voice to a woman's story.
I mean, in the 17th century in Massachusetts, here's the hierarchy, and it's theologically clear. Man has dominion over the animals, and husband has dominion over his wife. I mean, I was shocked when I realized that even 31 couples divorced. I mean, that's a tiny number for a century in Boston. But even that number just surprised me. And again, most of those divorces were because the husband, it was discovered, had a wife in London, has run off with another woman to New Haven, or, and this goes back to the impotence trial, it's comic, I have to share this with you. The guy is getting divorced for impotence by his wife. And we're going to get to a name here that's important. And he is the worst lawyer since Rudy Giuliani, because his defense to the charges of adultery are, I'm not impotent. I'm having an affair with, watch for the name, Hester Luig. The only two capital crimes are witchcraft and adultery. So he's not executed, but the woman is granted her divorce. He does go to the stocks. He does have to give her 1/3 of his estate, which maybe it isn't fair, but it is more than I expected that a woman would receive in a Puritan divorce, 1/3. And of course, years later, when Nathaniel Hawthorne was writing the Scarlet Letter, he would choose the name Hester for the woman with the scarlet A.
It's interesting that you bring up Hawthorne, because in my book, Magic Lessons, my character falls in love with his ancestor, who was one of the judges at the witch trials, a horrible person, the only judge at the trials who never asked for forgiveness or said he was wrong. And, I think it's so interesting that Hawthorne felt like he had to kind of do payback for his family, and write the Scarlet Letter, which is one of my favorite books. And, I just feel like, it's not about witchcraft per se, but it's about adultery.
A woman living outside the Puritan theocracy.
Yeah. And I realized, sometimes when you're writing a novel, you don't even realize what it is until you're finished, and I realized that my character, Maria Owens, kind of follows Hester Prynne's arc in that she's a woman who's alone, who has a child, who doesn't
Hannah.
say who the father is, who's living outside, in the woods by herself. And it really kind of follows along that. And I just feel that, I feel like we have such a debt to these New England storytellers, but these women and these outsiders are always really interesting to write about. And I think very often you and I both are writing about outsiders.
Yep.
And don't you think so?
I do. I do. And there's so many things I loved about Magic Lessons that makes it so timely. And that's the sense of dread. I mean, unlike its two previous books in the series, the dread is just so magnificently palpable. And I think that says something also about the last 5 years.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we've had that same sort of feeling. And also, that we're writing about healers, and that is so important right now, that the idea that our science and medicine and people who have these kind of beliefs that are outside of science and medicine, it's just a very interesting parallel to what we're writing about, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea that the governor of Michigan last month is pilloried as a witch.
Yeah.
I mean, what does that tell you about the way the word is sometimes abused and co-opted? When Mary Deerfield is on trial for her life in Hour of the Witch, among the crimes, bringing herbs to a dying servant.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me because I feel like, when I started writing about witches, I've always been interested in magic. I was a huge fairy tale fan. And I just wondered, what did you read as a kid that you feel really influenced you? For me, it was kind of the Grimm's brothers and also all the Andrew Lang books, the Blue Fairy book, the Red Fairy book. What did you read that you felt really influenced you as a writer?
Books that broke my heart. When I think of the books growing up that I remember today, there are books like Daniel Keyes' Flowers for Algernon.
Oh, yeah.
Or Esther Forbes, Johnny Tremaine, or Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. If it left me weeping inside at the end, those are the books that stayed with me. I mean, I've confessed this before, but I love the Harry Potter series. But at the end of book 7, I would have killed Harry Potter.
Well, I know nothing about Harry Potter, so I can't comment on Harry Potter. But what you're just saying about breaking your heart, I always feel that I want a book that makes me feel. That's what I'm looking for as a reader. And one of my favorite writers, kind of as a 12-year-old, was Ray Bradbury. I discovered him.
Yeah.
Ray Bradbury, I feel like he's kind of a surrogate father for a lot of writers. He's such a moral voice. And there is so much about good and evil in his books. I feel like, of course, he's adult reading, but I feel like every 12-year-old in America should have to read Ray Bradbury. And I feel like reading him changed my life as a person, but also as a writer. I just thought of, he wrote about magic in the real world. And that really interested in me a lot, because I felt like I'm not living in fairy tale times. How does magic affect me? And he somehow did that in his books in such an incredible way. And I still feel so grateful to him.
Yeah. In my novel, Secrets of Eden, the character Heather Lorenz says to a minister, I've lived a life without magic and a life with magic, and the world is a better place with magic in it.
That's great. That's beautiful. I really think that's true. And I have always felt, and, in my book, in Magic Lessons, I was really shocked to find the that something like, I forget the exact, something like 97% of women in England were illiterate. And that was part of not having power, right? If you're illiterate, you don't have words and language, you don't have power. And I always think about that as what we do as writers, as kind of a form of magic in a way, at creating something out of nothing. It's just, marks on a page, but then you read it and you create an entire world inside your head. And it's so interactive. You write the book and then I read it and it becomes kind of my book because I'm imagining the whole world that you've just written.
And we are bringing all of our life experiences to the page. Every story that you're telling, a reader is reading slightly differently because of her childhood, or her mother and father, or a sibling. And that's part of the other thing that makes a novel really special. All of those Proustian Madelines are different for you than they are for me.
Yeah, that's really true. When I was reading The Hour of the Witch, my parents were divorced when I was 8, and I did not meet anyone else whose parents were divorced until I went to college. That's, a real difference as to, what life is like now. And so I was kind of reading this as, the child of divorce and, like of seeing this very unhappy marriage kind of play out on your pages. And I realized I was reading it with this kind of, informed by my own life.
Yeah. The book has only been out 3 days, but today I must have received 8 emails from women who escaped toxic marriages and wanted to share with me the parallels between what they endured in the 21st century and what Mary Deerfield endured in the 17th.
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting and so sad that, that there are so many similarities and so many women who are trapped in this kind of situation. And I think that's one of the reasons that girls and women love stories about witches, is that they often have the power to undo things like that, to escape from things like that. And I think that's part of, I think that little girls are still dressing up as witches, on Halloween. And why would you do that? Since, as you said, it's kind of the worst word you could use to a woman, right? It's like the kindest thing of all, but yet it's a compliment at the same time.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there is this fascinating dichotomy. On the one hand, you've got the old crone with the big wart on the nose.
Right.
And then you've got Elizabeth Montgomery as Samantha Stevens.
Yeah,
you have.
Yeah, it's so interesting that in Salem they have a statue of Bewitched, of Samantha. Yeah. I think it's so interesting, kind of the two levels of being a witch.
And I read an interview with one of the showrunners, the writers, and they were talking about Samantha's mother, Andorra.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things he said was, she's a dark character, not because she's a witch, but because she's a mother-in-law. Ha, 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 ha. As if that's better somehow. And don't you love it also when you go to Salem, there's always the docent who asks, so how many witches were burned in Salem? Somebody says 19. Says, wrong. 0. We didn't burn them. We hanged them. Ha ha ha. Another, terrible Salem joke.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because when I was doing research about witches, one of the things, I'm also very interested in Jewish history, and the only place in Europe where there weren't witch trials or witch manias was in Spain and Portugal, where there was the Inquisition. And so the persecution of Jews kind of took the place of the persecution of women, and mostly women. I know there were some male witches, but it's almost as if, these societies, ours included, have the urge to persecute, that they need to kind of gang up against the other.
Yep. And I think there are two reasons for that. First of all, to build solidarity among the majority, to find a scapegoat for all of society's ills. And in the case of certainly 17th century New England, how do you explain ships that sink, hurricanes that destroy whole wharves, babies who die? How do you explain smallpox? How do you explain the utter awfulness of the world if you believe in a fundamentally loving God, a God who gave his only son to the world? To make it inexplicable, you've Satan, and you've Satan's minions, and you have the other witches.
Right. Or you could use Eve, as the Puritans often did.
As a young.
But Chris, can I ask you another question? I think people are always very interested in the way people write and the way they start off their books. And I'm wondering, when you're writing, do you do an outline? How do you kind of begin the whole world that you're going to create?
I'm going to ask you that in a second too. I begin with a premise. That's it. Alcoholic hot mess of a flight attendant wakes up far from home in bed with a guy she picked up, and he's dead.
It's a good premise.
Young, devout, Puritan woman tries to escape a toxic marriage and winds up fighting for her life in a witch trial. And then I let my characters take me by the hand and lead me through the dark of the story. I never know where it's going, and that's part of the great joy. Now, I do know two things. At some point, whether I'm 2/3 or 3/4 of the way into the book is going to begin to feel like it wants to end. And then I will set up 3 massive whiteboards in this office, using red, black, and blue dry erase markers. And I will literally plot out different arcs. If this happens to this character, what's going to happen here? And it always has to be a natural cause and effect. If this is the cause, what's the obvious natural effect? Now, the other thing is this. You mentioned earlier your earliest drawings. When my father died, I came across the earliest short stories I wrote. Wow. 3rd and 4th grade. My mother had saved them and my father had saved them. And this is the oldest short story in existence I ever wrote.
Wow.
It's from 3rd grade. The penmanship is really good. The story is really bad. But, and I'm 8 or 9 years old when I wrote this. This is the last sentence. The dripping stopped and the vultures had their meals.
Oh, wow.
When my books work, regardless of the premise, they're going to be about dread. That's what's going to keep you turning the pages. And how about you? Do you outline, or are you a pantser, a seat of the pantser?
Well, I do outline. I usually do outline, and I kind of like, I do like a hodgepodge first, of just kind of possible characters, possible settings, and then I do lists of things, like lists. This is the whiteboards are involved with this sometimes, with different magic markers, lists of plants. I kind of lists of the animals that would be there. If I'm doing a historical novel, just, food and clothing. And so then I make an outline, and then I have the same thing, like the characters start to make their own choices. I don't know what's happening. I get really confused. I don't know if it's a book. I don't, and then I outline it on the whiteboard. I use Post-it notes. I don't know why. I think it's because I was a screenwriter for many years, and that's how we did it when we broke down a script. But so I'll have these Post-it notes on these whiteboards, and I don't even know if I ever look at them, but I feel like I have to make them. Yep. And it's just kind of an ongoing process that keeps changing and changing. When the book is done, I don't know how it was written. I don't remember writing it. I don't know how that happened. I don't really have a memory of it. It's almost like it's magic at the end of it.
I know when I have the moment of inspiration. The Flight Attendant was born in a bar after I'd flown from Armenia through Moscow to New York City and I'm meeting someone for dinner. And three things came together alchemically. First of all, the beauty of the booze. I come from a family of alcoholics on both sides.
Oh,
So I'm never going to glamorize alcoholism, but damn, a liquor bottle is beautiful. A martini glass is lovely. That was the first thing. The second was the miracle of aviation. I had breakfast in Armenia and I'm having dinner in New York City, 8 time zones away. And we can only do that because of planes.
yeah.
And the third, Russia. Russia is the gift that keeps on giving to novelists. I mean, I've flown Aeroflot and I was thinking about the fact that no matter who's running the Kremlin, it's going to be an honest to God James Bond villain. And I wrote the first 3 pages on cocktail napkins at the
Wow.
bar. An Hour of the Witch was the same way. I'd heard a sermon in church and Satan was mentioned, and not as in church lady. Well, isn't that special, church lady? But Satan as in somebody that 350 years ago we thought was looking over our shoulder.
Hmm.
And I wrote the first sentence of The Hour of the Witch.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's funny how books come about and how they change and how you get the inspiration for them. You know, I feel like for me, you know, I wrote my first magic book 25 years ago. I wrote Practical Magic, and I never thought I would, you know, I thought that was the end of it. And then my readers kept asking me for more and saying, you know, we don't feel like this is finished. And I decided to go back in time, not to the 17th century, but to the 1960s in a book called The Rules of Magic, because
Of course, yeah.
the 1960s in New York City was kind of my time and my favorite time. I wish I could time travel there right now. And that was so much fun to write. And kind of the whole attitude towards magic was very 60s and so different than writing about it in the 17th century when it's so dangerous. But it was still, you know, somewhat dangerous even in the 60s, because I think to be different is always dangerous. And of course, that's what we're interested in. You know, those are the stories that we're interested in, is people who are different, people who break the rules, people who have courage.
I remember at my communion, my Episcopal confirmation, 1972, my mother's best friend, a hippie, is there. And we're doing the wafer and the wine. And afterwards, this glorious hippie says to me, I gotta tell you, the body, the blood, is this like a religion, or am I in a Bram Stoker novel? Kind of creepy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Okay, clearly I just offended everyone who's watching. I'm really sorry, but that is what she said, and I loved it at the time.
It's intense. It's intense. That's true. But all
I'm 11 years old and she's telling me this.
Yeah. Well, when you said, you know, your mom's friend, the hippie lady, you know, I just feel like that time period is so interesting to me, because I think I'm always interested in kind of like in Hester Prynne, in that kind of a woman. And that's what happens in The Hour of the Witch. That's what happens in Magic Lessons. It's a woman who kind of refuses to bend to the rules and who's smart enough to try to make it work for her.
And in both books, surrounded by men who make you want to pull your hair out.
I know, but Chris, how does that make you feel? I mean, you know, writing about men like that, I mean, you know, it's kind of interesting, and it's interesting for me. You know, I have some terrific male characters, but I also have some terrible male characters.
Me too. I mean, there are some good men, you know, in Hour of the Witch. You know, they're not all beasts. But the fact is, when I was writing Hour of the Witch, my heroes were the heroines,
Yeah.
the women, Mary Deerfield, Constance Winston. I mean, I would have to tell you one footnote. There's a character in the book named Peregrine, which is
Yes.
a great Puritan name, but Peregrine in Hour and the Witch, because I was writing a lot of it in a pandemic, is named after my favorite brand of gin, Peregrine Gin.
It's a great name. It's a great name. It's a great name. And I know
Puritans.
it's an
Tell you
early.
all about the Puritans. They had great names. My wife, whose ancestors were, Brewsters on the Mayflower, second generation, 3 sons, free love, experience, and grace.
Hence your daughter's name.
Grace Experience.
Great name.
Thank you.
Would have been a good name in the 17th century too.
Yeah, yep. Not too, yeah. And it was 2 different brothers.
Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I feel like, when you name your characters, people often ask you, how do you name your characters? Sometimes I've had to change a name and it's been a horrible trauma because
Yes.
once you name a character, they're so the name is so much part of who they are. And you probably have this too. I've written so many books that I'm kind of running out of names because I don't want to use the same ones over and over again. And
okay, have you ever had a character, and I'm sure you haven't, I just can't remember, named Alice?
No, I haven't. Have you had a character named Chris?
Once, and I've had a couple of Christinas.
Yeah.
But
no.
yes, I forget which book it was. It was one of those those fundraising auctions at a library or a hospice. And the winner was named Chris.
Well, I don't think I could write a character with my name because, the funny thing about fiction is you're writing about yourself in many different ways, but it's also your ability to be kind of honest has to do with the fact that it's all muted. It's like a dream, it's not like writing autobiography or memoir or something like that. So I can't imagine writing a character named Alice. I can't even imagine trying.
Yep. I mean, think of what the readers would read into it and would assume and wonder.
Yeah. Although I have to admit that often some of my characters have my birthday. So I do get that.
Yep. And very often my books are rich with autobiographic minutia. The guest room is set in Bronxville, and those are my streets and my houses in high school. That's my elementary school. The book's set in Vermont, like Midwives or The Sleepwalker, unbelievably autobiographic, or The Flight Attendant. My aunt was a flight attendant. Even Hour of the Witch has got weird, surprising moments of autobiography, including the foods that some characters like, and the
Really?
foods that some characters find inedible.
That's interesting. Yeah, and as I was saying before, sometimes I feel like the writer's the last to know. Do you ever have that feeling where you've written this book and it's not until after you've written it, you read it, that you realize the emotional connection to your own life?
Well, or to our literary predecessors. You mentioned John Hawthorne in Magic Lessons. So I write a book called Midwives, and the main character is named Sybil Danforth.
Mm-hmm.
Up until my editor said, we're going to galleys, I've got to have a last name. Because up until then, Sybil's last name was Kiln, K-I-L-N, because she's a peace, love, tie-dye, hippie pot thrower. And that was my mnemonic to remember who she is. So it's time to come up with a last name. And Country Home has an article about my good friends, the Pewters, the Danforths. So I use the name Danforth. Cut to 1998. I am speaking somewhere in Massachusetts at a high school. And young woman in the audience raises her hand. She's in 11th grade. And she says, loved your book, but don't you think the name Sybil Danforth is a little too obviously symbolic? And I said, yeah, I get it, Sybil. And she said, no, I meant Danforth. And I said, the pewters? And she said, no, you've got a midwife on trial. I was speaking of Judge Danforth in The Crucible.
That's
I thought
interesting.
that was
I
great.
wonder if you knew that. I wonder if that was somewhere in your brain.
I'm
And
sure it was.
I'm sure
I'm
it
sure.
was. Yeah.
Fantastic. Sorry to interrupt.
Whoa.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was such a wonderful, riveting conversation. Thank you so much for allowing us all to act as flies on the wall.
Oh, Emily, thank you.
Thank you.
Now,
I forgot anyone else was there.
I know it's hard on these webinars. It's a little, we sneak up on you, but we're going to move on to some audience Q&A. So anyone in the audience, if you come up with any questions, feel free to send them in the Q&A. We do have quite a few, and we have a little under 15 minutes, so we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. Let's see.
Okay,
here.
so every answer is yes or no.
Yeah, keep it short. No, please elaborate as you will. So you both mentioned that you like books that make you feel. Would you say that New England is a place that really makes you feel? Do you get inspiration from its rich environment? Full disclosure, it says this is from someone who was born in Boston.
Alice, do you want to go first?
Well, yeah. I mean, I do feel inspired by being here. I mean, I'm a New Yorker by birth, and I always will consider myself a New Yorker. But in terms of a literary tradition, I feel part of kind of a New England literary tradition. So I do feel inspired, especially by the kind of, kind of dark nature of a lot of New England writers.
Yeah. I too feel part of a New England tradition, but I also know that books set in the Southwest or the South or Chicago can destroy me. I mean, Rebecca Mackay's The Great Believers, which is set in Chicago, just destroyed me. Amor Towles, A Gentleman in Moscow, which is set almost entirely in a hotel in Moscow, destroyed me. That point noted, whenever I think of the first book as an adult that left me seriously verklempt, it might have been Howard Frank Mosher's A Stranger in the Kingdom about northeastern Vermont.
Yeah, that's
I
beautiful.
finished reading it on my porch, and to quote Jerry Seinfeld, I'm wondering, what's this wet, salty discharge coming out of my eyes? And I wrote Howard a fan letter just to Irisburg, Vermont. And he wrote me back one of his letters on yellow legal pads and blue ink, and would start a friendship that would last until he died.
Absolutely. Speaking of books that make you feel, we're always looking for good book recommendations. So what is the last great book you read that you would recommend?
Well, for me, I would say I love Matt Haig's book, The Midnight Library. I was extremely depressed. I picked it up, and I just felt also compelled to just write him a letter. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful book, and I think a lot of people out there are loving it right now.
Yeah. Dusk Night Dawn by Anne Lamott. The Committed by Viet Nguyen. Homeland Elegies by Ayat Akhtar. I love a book that gives me an inferiority complex. I remember reading Homeland Elegies and thinking to myself, someday I want to write a sentence with two words side by side, like Orphic concordances.
That's a great goal to have. Yeah, I agree. So as far as book recommendations go, somebody asked, what is Chris Bajalian's favorite Alice Hoffman novel, and vice versa? What is Alice Hoffman's favorite Chris Bajalian novel?
Well,
I'm going to go first.
I have to say Midwives, because it was my first of Chris's books, and I just loved it, and I had this immediate reaction to it. So that I have to say that.
I got a couple. First of all, I loved Blackbird House so much. I love all 3 books: Practical Magic, Rules of Magic, Magic Lessons, and then The Dove Keepers. Just astonishing, magnificent books that are going to be in print in 100 years and
Chris,
studied.
thank you so much.
Fantastic. So before we switch gears, some people had questions about the film and TV adaptations of your works, but before we move away from the books, what do you ultimately hope readers will take away from the book we spoke about today?
Okay. I hope readers love Hour of the Witch and love Mary Deerfield and close the book saying to themselves, damn, that is one courageous, smart woman. Whether I'm a man or a woman, let me live my life with a moral compass that accurate.
Oh, me? Do you want me to say
Alice,
something?
what is one
Oh,
thing?
well, I don't know. Always feel like when I finish a book, I want to, just as Chris and I were talking about, I want to have felt something. I want to feel like I have been on an emotional journey. And I think that's what I would want for someone who reads Magic Lessons to feel, that they've kind of felt what the characters feel and that they've kind of gone on their own journey with the book.
I love that.
Yeah, me too. So kind of switching gears here, both of you have some adaptations on the screen of a few of your works. We did get the question for Alice, because you have Practical Magic specifically, and then Aquamarine also, which is kind of switching genres there. But what did you think about those film adaptations?
Well, you know what I think, and I would suspect Chris feels the same way, is that, you're sitting in a room alone, creating this thing inside your own mind. And then all of a sudden, like, these hundreds and thousands of people are involved in creating a world that was based on whatever you thought of, sitting in your office on a winter's day. It's kind of an amazing experience to have that happen. It's very unusual and it's very interesting. And whether it's like the book or veers from the book, it's still kind of an incredible experience because it belongs to someone else. It belongs to the director and to the actors, and it's a very interesting experience to go through, don't you think?
I do. I love the Flight Attendant TV series, and I'm thrilled it has season 2. I thought Kaylee Cuoco is Cassie Bowden, my alcoholic hot mess of a flight attendant. And Steve Yockey, the showrunner, is brilliant. And the whole idea that in a friggin' pandemic, they filmed on 3 continents and got it done. But to go back to what Alice said, I remember one day I was on set and they were filming the scene where Cassie wakes up and her paramour from the night before is dead. Someone's cut his throat. And she's frantically cleaning up the hotel room. And there must have been 80 people there. There's one person really in the scene. And, there's directors and assistant directors and gaffers and best boys and cameramen and craft services. And I remember thinking to myself, what in God's name have I wrought? This is fantastic. I'm employing Brooklyn.
Well, I can certainly say that I loved all of the film and TV adaptations as well as the books. So
Thanks, Emily.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So we're winding down here a little bit. I do have one question left for each of you. So first, this one's for Alice. Can you tell us anything about the new book in the Owens family story that's coming out later this year?
Yeah, it's the fourth book, which I really never thought I'd write. And it's the final book, thanks. It's the final book. And I felt like people wanted to know kind of the end of the story. I mean, one thing that's so frustrating in life is that very often you don't get to know the end of the story about people in your lives. And, you know, they just disappear or you're not in touch with them anymore. But I just felt like people who had been on this ride for 25 years, you know, deserve to know what happened at the end. So I'm really excited about it. And I'm very excited to see what people think of it.
We're all very excited as well.
Me too.
Yeah.
And then for you, Chris, can you tell us anything about the next book you're working on? I believe you actually went to Africa to do some research pre-COVID, but can you tell us a little
Thank
bit?
God I did. Yeah, I wrote the book during the pandemic. It's all done. The next book you will see is October 2022. It's called The Lions of Hollywood, and it was inspired in part by Quentin Tarantino's magnificent movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Alice talked about New York in the 1960s. You know, that was her childhood. Well, I want to try to book about my childhood in movies. And so my book is about a 1960s Elizabeth Taylor type starlet who takes her newlywed entourage on a honeymoon safari to the Serengeti, where they are kidnapped by Russians in East Africa. And one by one, every single one of them, it seems, is either eaten or killed. That's the Lions of Hollywood.
Dread, Chris. That's what you were talking about. Dread.
Dread, but I loved it. I mean, I had so much fun writing it because I was back in the Serengeti in 2019. People weren't dying. I mean, by the time this pandemic is over, the equivalent of the population of Vermont will have died. Our children will have been forever scarred. So I've got to tell you, Emily, librarians like you are superheroes to keep it together for us. BookBar, you are superheroes to keep it together for us. I mean, we are all going to have PTSD because of 2020 forever, which is why we need so badly books like Magic Lessons and, yeah, Hour of the Witch.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for saying that. I mean, thank you both so much. I know probably a lot of attendees here, as well as myself, books really helped us get through. And so thank you also for giving us something to look forward to. I'm really looking forward to both of those books. Those sound amazing. And
makes a great Mother's Day gift. Magic Lessons, Hour of the Witch, two great books for Mother's Day.
Emma, thank you so much.
Am I the most shameless, horrible person ever?
No, you're not. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Chris. It's really been fun.
Alice, I love you. We've got to get together again in person. The last time Alice and I were together was actually, doing a mitzvah and teaching at Rutgers in, I think, 2018.
Yeah, that's right. I don't remember the
Too long ago.
I remember, but I hope to see you soon. And thank you so much for having us here. It's really been fun.
Thank you, Colorado.
Oh, thank you both so much. This was so wonderful. What a fun way to spend our evening. So thank you. And we hope you can come to Denver sometime soon. That would be, that's the goal. But thank you so much.
Derby.
Thank you for being here and having a lovely conversation and allowing us to listen in. That was fantastic. And thanks everyone who attended for joining us this evening. And we did put a link in the chat to a quick survey just to let us know at Arapahoe Libraries how you enjoyed today's program. And if there's any other authors you would like to see at Arapahoe Libraries or anything else, please let us know. We'd love to hear your feedback. But thanks everyone so much. This was so lovely.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night.